Brilliant. And it says on there leaping. So 2 hours ago, I got an email from a guy called Seth Godin, and I subscribe to his stuff, and he sends out these amazing messages. And today, it was just really relevant. He talked about the leap day, which is today, of course. And I'll very quickly read out the version, the edited version. It said, it's easy to imagine that sudden leaps are how we make our impact. Every 4 years, we have a worldwide holiday to celebrate the leap of choice. It's only once every 1,460 days, so you can do it. Leap today. Perhaps we begin by visualizing it in the most concrete terms you can find. Write it down. If you took a leap today, what would it look like? Who would benefit? And then share it with just one other person. Often the act of physically writing it down is the most difficult part. And he summed up my hopes for today, because this is a rare opportunity to choose to think differently and to question our current systems. And as he says, the act of physically writing it down, or writing down an alternative to what we currently have, is the most difficult part. So I'm delighted that you're here with me to try and do that together. So I've got a bunch of pictures like this on my phone, and some of you will have seen this picture before, but on the left, there's an electric car, and on the right, there's the charging station, and in the middle, there's the charging lead that's dangled and tangled between them, and it's in my way. I want to catch the bus in the background, but actually, I'm going to find it really difficult to get past that lead. And the car and the charging station were designed to reduce our impact on the planet. Brilliant. But now we've created a new accessibility challenge, and we've increased our impact on people. My question is that a just transition, or is that just a transition? Here's another example. In this picture, there's a cycle lane. It's been built to create a safe space, in inverted commas, for cyclists. But it's created a new hazard for people. In this case, it's a wheelchair user attempting to get to the bus stop on the other side. And the caption reads, "I now find it difficult and stressful to use public transport in a way I never did before." So it's the same thing. We've designed stuff to reduce our impact on the planet, which is great, but we've created a new accessibility challenge. Again, we've increased our impact on people. So we've started to redesign our world to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and rightly so, because transport is like one of the biggest things that is causing us problems. So we have to do this. But when we talk about a just transition, I'm not sure we know what it's going to look like. It all feels a little bit vague to me. This is the Scottish Government's Just Transition Commission quote. It says, this major opportunity before us now, as we rebuild our broken transport system, is to deliver a decarbonised transport network that supports and promotes equality, opens up a host of economic opportunities for businesses and consumers, and improvements to lifestyle and well-being. And we often read stuff like this, and you'll often see support and promote equality, leaves nobody behind. I couldn't agree more. This is exactly what we need. These are our aims. But the decarbonised network that supports equality is going to have all those barriers that we know about today removed, and we're going to have to avoid creating more, which we're already seeing. Now, in order to leave nobody behind, we have to invite them on board and offer them a seat and take them with us. And at the moment, I'm just not seeing those barriers disappear, and I'm not seeing that invitation or the seat being offered. Here's some worrying reality before we get a bit more positive and imaginative. And this isn't a blame game. This is about finding out what isn't working and why, and then offering alternative ways of working. So very quickly, back in 2022, Transport for All, who do some fantastic work, they wrote a great article that they looked at the inclusive transport strategy, the UK-wide one, and concluded that it had failed to have an impact on transport accessibility. And in fact, transport is in fact regressing. And then fast forward to the end of last year, and they did another amazing report. And here's a couple of quotes from them. This was from Disabled People. "We do not have equitable access into any mode of transport, and the impacts of this injustice can be felt in every corner of our lives." That's a very powerful quote. Here's the key one. 71% of disabled people said they can't use environmentally friendly transport because of a lack of availability and accessibility. And I think this third quote maybe should be the new focus for our discussions around accessibility and inclusion. We talk about encouraging people to change their travel habits, but we've got to start by enabling them. And if history tells us that we haven't been able to make progress after decades of research and legislation and campaigning, then what's going to happen in the future if we don't change our ways? It feels to me like we're having two separate conversations with two separate goals. We're talking about accessible transport in one place. We're talking about decarbonising transport in another place. And it feels as though the urgency of decarbonisation means that the action and the attention is moving over to the right of that picture. And actually, we're seeing this happen. So already, I think it's almost half of the buses sold in 2021 globally were electric, which is vital for the climate. And we know that. And as I've said, transport is one of the biggest emitters of greenhouse gas emissions. But let's look at the experience that we're creating. 70 new electric buses in Nottingham, and London's electric bus fleet being the biggest in Europe, which is great. But the comments on enhanced customer experience is that they're smoother and quieter, very nice, and they've got access to free USB charging points, Wi-Fi, and electric air conditioning. York's bus fleet, which they wanted to be the first fully electric fleet outside London, well, they got them, but disability rights activist Flick Williams described it as a missed opportunity. And this is a quote: "The new buses unveiled today are a huge disappointment for York's disabled community. The new design is a litany of missed opportunity for accessibility improvements." Which is probably not a surprise to many of us. So why have we failed to make progress, and how can we change things? I've got some ideas for a few of the challenges that I think we're up against with our current approach. First is a need for speed. We're up against the clock, there's no doubt about that. But it means that we need to be even more clear about our goals. And I think those examples that I gave just then illustrate that. And I'm not picking on buses, by the way. I will be talking about buses today, but that's a lot of examples out there, but I'm not picking on them. Poor language. I think we plan for transport, but in fact we experience journeys. So when we take journeys, we run, we walk, we wheel, we chat, we eat, drink, watch, we stare out the window, we need the bathroom, we're late, things go wrong, we have to change plans. We have multi-sensory experiences, but we tend to plan transport and talk about things like modal shift and dwell times. There's a mismatch. It feels like we're talking about different things, and I think our language maybe constrains us. It also feels like a lack of vision. We've got targets, we've got KPIs, pathways, strategies, but what are we working towards? Where's the vision that we're all aiming for? How do we build a livable future if we don't know what people want and need, if we don't know what it's going to look like? The IPPR, which is a think tank, urged the government recently to think beyond the existing transport system to imagine a wider range of possible futures, and I think that's what we've got to do. And this final one, resilient status quo. I was listening to a radio program recently, and it was all about the challenges that the government has fixing local services. And here's a quote from it. So this is Baroness Louise Casey did a thing called Fixing Britain. And she said, "There's a strong desire in government to fix problems and fix people, and government isn't diverse and generally doesn't reflect the demographics or the life experiences of the citizens which they serve. And that leads to groupthink and poor understanding of this other that they're trying to fix." And then she goes on to say something which is, I think, really fundamental, that this creates this poor understanding informs the design of policies. And then, and this is a quote, "Any research that's conducted, any knowledge that's created by engaging with those who have experienced whatever it is we're trying to fix comes straight back into a system that doesn't necessarily understand it." And I think this lies at the heart of a lot of our problems, is that the system that we've built, whether it's transport systems or others, do they understand? Does it understand the knowledge we create when we've done our research, when we've done our projects? Does it actually accept the research that we've conducted? And crucially, does it understand the impact of the injustices that we've created? And there's something for me about that quote, which is used so many times, but I still use it. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. And that feels highly relevant here. It feels like we need to build an alternative system that we can plug these ideas back into, and it'll accept it. It'll actually shift the status quo rather than it being so resilient. So I've got a little bit of time left, and I'm going to try and describe some ideas that may be a bit different, a bit radical, but how can we get positive and get some ideas going here? I think the reaction to a need for speed is a slow transition. And by that, I mean borrowing the words of the slow movement, which is Being slow means never rushing, never striving to save time for the sake of it. It means remaining calm and unflustered, even when the circumstances force us to speed up. Instead of doing everything faster, let's do everything at the right speed. Let's do it in context and in collaboration so we find the right problems to solve and in the right order. I think the reaction to our poor language is using new language, a new lexicon. If our aim is to decarbonise transport, that's what we'll do. We'll have cleaner vehicles, but our services might still disable and disadvantage a lot of people. So if we aim to create things like more inclusive low carbon journeys, then suddenly that's a whole different thing. I think our language constrains us, but it can also open up new possibilities. For our lack of vision, well, let's use our collective imagination. We've all got some amazing ideas out there, but it's just that we haven't really put them together to create visions. So let's imagine alternative futures and create desire lines, if you like, that other people can be guided by. And we've already tried this, but we don't have time to tell you about that, but I can tell you about that another time. And I think the key thing for this status quo problem is to offer alternatives and say, well, what about this? And actually put some detail around this. Organizations have been working on emissions, for example, emissions reductions for years, and they've developed framework standards and measurements. Why don't we try using those tools to describe efforts to improve inclusion? And then we can start aligning those two goals. And that's what we're going to do today, is going to consider that fourth one by looking at building an alternative together, borrowing from others. And then at least we've got a new model, and we can look at it and say, well, that works or it doesn't work. But at the moment, it feels like we've got lots of warm words, but little detail on how we're going to make this transition a just one. Okay, so we hear a lot about the need for systemic change, but what does that actually mean? And in my work, I've learned from so many people about the challenges that are faced throughout our journey, throughout the whole journey. Okay, and we talk about the whole journey so many times. But I've been wondering, well, why don't we talk about journey as a system? And transport is one element, but it's just one element. It's an important one, but it's just one element, because actually the journey is so, so much more. And I think if we make that system visible, then maybe it can help us to think this through in a different way. So let's try that. We're going to try this in groups. I'd like to introduce you to a couple of people who are disabled and disadvantaged by their local transport networks. And they're off to the theatre tonight. And here are some insights into their journeys. Jim lives on the edge of town. He's recently been diagnosed with dementia. He's still traveling independently, though. He finds some situations overwhelming. He prefers not to be in a rush. He would prefer the least overwhelming routes. He needs to take 2 buses to get to the theatre. And he likes to walk on even surfaces because his balance has been affected. And he also wishes that buildings didn't have shiny floors because his sense of perception has been changed since his diagnosis. And here's Rachel. Rachel broke her leg 2 weeks ago, so she hasn't been out that much. She lives in a nearby city and she needs to get the train to and from her home. When she gets into the town where the theatre is, she needs to take the tram to and from the theatre. She finds public toilets really difficult at the moment, and there's a queue at the theatre after the performance. It was a bit long. She couldn't easily stand. So she's relying on the toilet at the rail station, but she knows that it closes early at night. And she knows this because she travels with her mum, who's a wheelchair user. And so she's getting a glimpse of her mum's experience now. And if you're wondering what they're off to see, it's COP26, the musical, which is an absolute sellout. So in groups, what I'd like you to do is to consider the journey to or from, and you'll find out when you get there, but your facilitators are going to take you through a journey to or from the theatre. And I'd like you to think about potential points of exclusion. Let's call this out. The ultimate impact of some of the barriers that people encounter is exclusion. They can't do it. So let's call them exclusions. User experience, think about your own experience, think about what other people have told you, and let's build a picture of an entire journey for one of these characters. So I'm going to put you into the great hands of our facilitators, and I think Amy's, through the power of Zoom, is going to take us off to those rooms now.